Morning, evening, afternoon. Uh, Thank you for joining us for this keynote session on insights from Deloitte's 2025 RWE Benchmarking Industry Survey. Uh, in this session, we'll talk a lot about the state of real-world evidence at a global level. Deloitte conducts a survey of all the leading global organizations around their adoption and level of usage of real-world evidence. In this summit last year, Jeff and Raveen had presented findings from this survey, and this year there are updated findings that the Deloitte leadership will share with us. But more than that, today's session is deeply personal for me. With us, we have Brett Davis, who is the U.S. Chief Innovation Officer at Deloitte and General Manager for Converge. When I started my career, Brett was one of the first leaders that I worked with, and we were at the beginning of the journey of Converge Health, which was a transformational journey at Deloitte around bringing real-world evidence to the life sciences community at scale. And now, many years later, Converge Health by Deloitte, which Brett co-founded, is live in 25 countries. Millions of patient lives are being supported by Converge Health products as we speak today. I would also like to introduce Jeff Morgan, who is a managing director at Deloitte, where he leads life sciences R&D and RWE practice. With 25 plus years of experience across pharma, medtech, and consulting, Jeff advises clients around real-world evidence and R&D and what are some of the next generation technologies happening here. So for me, this is a incredibly personal moment where I have Brett and Jeff, who've been very close friends over the years, under whose guidance and mentorship I started my career. And today here they are with us to share their insights on this topic. So thank you, Brett and Jeff, and welcome to the Research and Health Innovation Summit.
Thanks, Parav, and thanks for having us. I'm getting flashbacks to 2014 and 2015 when we were all starting the Converge Health business together at Deloitte. So great to be here. So as Parav mentioned, I now lead innovation as our Chief Innovation Officer across all industries and offerings at Deloitte in the U.S. But my head and my heart have always been and always will be in life sciences and healthcare. So super excited to be here with you today because I truly do believe, at least in my almost 26-year-old career, we are at an incredibly exciting inflection point. So I don't know if we can pull up the content. Perfect. So Parav already covered a little bit of this in the introduction, but if we go to the next slide, in preparing for this, I figured I'd do a little bit of introduction and some history. So what you're seeing here on the left is a work product from my first job out of college. I'm actually a dropout. I dropped out of a 5-year program to join a bioinformatics startup in 1999 called Viachem Systems, stood for Your Path to Knowledge. And as the first product manager, starry-eyed product manager who was excited about the human genome being sequenced for the first time and this amazing new unlock called the internet, we were going to change life sciences and healthcare. And so it's probably too small to read, but we were going to integrate all this new genotypic data that was available to us and integrate it with phenotypic data and literature and proteomic data. We're going to stuff it all into an Oracle 8i database, which is that architecture diagram, and apply these amazing visualizations. And 2 to 3 years later, certainly we would have personalized drugs and medicines and understand value in healthcare. While we've made amazing progress since then, of course, we were a little optimistic on that journey. Fast forward to 2013, and Parav already covered a little bit of this in my introduction, but I joined Deloitte to found Converge Health. And at that moment, I was convinced, if you can see this slide, and this is actually from the business case that we took to the board of directors of Deloitte to get $250 million approved to fund Converge Health's launch, we were going to pull together all this data that's digitized for the first time, electronic medical record data with genomic data, proteomic data, et cetera. And this amazing new thing called the cloud was available to us that was going to help us scale that analysis and certainly personalized medicine and the transformation of healthcare was only 2 to 3 years away. Fast forward, and I'm very proud of the progress we've made with Converge Health and the broader industry since 2013. Amazing progress. And here we are in 2025, and we still haven't completely transformed where life sciences and healthcare is going. Now in my new role, I have the privilege of working across every industry, as I said. So I'm going to share a little bit of a frame before handing it to Jeff of why I truly do believe we are at a tipping point in life sciences and healthcare, and in particular, how evidence is generated and used with this amazing new technology, general purpose technology called AI. So a couple reasons I wanted to share for that optimism. One, newer technologies, in this case, I'm going to focus a lot on AI, are showing tremendously higher growth rates than previous technologies across a number of dimensions: rate of adoption, funding and investment, as well as speed to achieving greater impact. One measure of impact is adoption and therefore revenue milestones, and I'll share a little bit of data on that. And one of the reasons we believe, and this is substantiated by other academic research, is why this is happening so fast, is that unlike previous general purpose technologies, the base technologies for adoption were already there, right? To adopt AI, the cloud is already there. We've already migrated most meaningful data sets to the cloud that you need to take advantage of AI. Most of the Western world and the developed world, now has base level hardware and devices to access and take advantage of it. And so the rollout and adoption is almost frictionless. Now, it's not frictionless inside an organization for a whole bunch of regulatory and legal reasons, which we'll touch on as well. But we are at a different moment than in 2000 and 2013 when we think about this in the context of life sciences and healthcare. We go to the next slide. Already touched on this, bit of an eye chart, but some data to back up that the pace of change is massively accelerating. So I'll double click on the adoption rates of technology. It's actually almost hard to wrap your head around how fast AI is being adopted, particularly in the consumer world. But we're starting to see that once we kind of get through the initial trough of disillusionment of some of the early AI pilots at the enterprise level as well, which we'll touch on. Funding is in a very different spot in terms of funding velocity and investments in emerging technologies, including non-traditional sources of capital that haven't existed there, the private equity and the private capital markets through sovereign wealth funds and government investment, et cetera. It's just at unprecedented highs. And then, like I said, the speed to achieving revenue milestones is incredible. I mean, we thought software as a service was an amazing business model innovation to drive recurring revenue. We're seeing AI move at a much faster clip in terms of the companies driving these innovations. So pace is accelerating. Just to make the first one come to life, if we go to the next slide just briefly, you can see the arc of adoption. And now this is in percentage of the US population, but global charts show similar adoption. I think even faster adoption because of the ubiquity of mobile and being able to adopt AI, even if you don't have access to other means of accessing the internet. So we're just at this unprecedented spot in terms of adoption of technology that we've never seen before. Okay, if we go to the next slide. A couple reasons why we believe this pace is not going to slow down. There's some talk of a bubble, and I don't want to be the guy who predicts that it's not a bubble right before the bubble happens, but there are some real reasons to believe that this acceleration is not slowing down anytime soon. So I already mentioned the convergence of general purpose technologies. What do we mean by general purpose technologies? Things like the steam engine, electricity, other digital technologies that are ubiquitous and have the ability to impact multiple sectors and industries. AI is nothing if not a general purpose technology, and can be applied to almost every aspect of life, from education to healthcare to banking to finance to health and well-being and there's not to government. There's not one part of our society that's not going to be transformed and impacted by AI as a general purpose technology. To democratize tooling. Things like low code, no code platforms, much more open models, and the ability to access the skills needed to take advantage of it. are also in an incredible spot. In what Jeff's about to talk about with real world evidence, we've already largely digitized healthcare, right? So we have a lot of the necessary pieces in place in most parts of the world, certainly within large multinational life sciences companies who are driving innovation in drug discovery. They've long since moved and created the infrastructure, some of which we've helped them with over the years through Converge Health platforms, be ready for this moment. Cost declines for core enablers. We continue to see Moore's Law look unambitious across many different curves of cost and speed. We don't see that changing anytime soon. I already touched on capital liquidity and investors. There is a lot of capital seeking returns in this space across every aspect of investment, public and private. And so that is going to, we believe, keep fueling progress given the stakes are so high. And then not in every part of the world, but generally speaking, there's actually policy tailwinds, certainly in the US, with some of the changes in policy as it relates to AI and innovation more broadly. There's certainly very nice tailwinds. Many other governments around the world are also leaning in and creating favorable policy environments. Western Europe is probably the one exception to that, with some of their policies that they've adopted, which one might argue are more headwinds than tailwinds. So overall, we don't see the pace changing. And so if we go to the next slide, this could not come at a more important time when we look at this through the lens of life sciences innovation in particular. So we have a Deloitte study that we've been doing for the last almost 15 years now, where despite all of this investment, and I attribute this to we've made progress, but all of the easy drugs have been done, we haven't really seen a broad turning of the ROI curve on IRR for R&D. And you can see our 15 or so years of that study here on the left. And that's about to become compounded in terms of being a business problem because of the loss of exclusivity, the LOE, otherwise known as a patent cliff, coming for many of the world's largest biopharmaceutical companies. So I'm about to turn it to my colleague and friend, Jeff Morgan. But real world evidence, when you combine it with AI in particular, holds the promise to change this trajectory. So Jeff's going to walk you through, if you go forward 2 slides. As Purav mentioned, we've done a real world evidence benchmarking survey going back, if you go one more slide, to 2017. We did our first one. Jeff and a number of other co-authors just came out with our most recent one. And then we'll wrap by showing you what we believe is a preview to what is rapidly becoming the future reality, which is applying agentic AI to real world evidence, which will hopefully bring it full circle for all of you, where AI and RWE begin to meet in the market to drive real value. So Jeff, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Brett. Like Brett mentioned, we've been conducting these benchmarking surveys for a number of years, and really it's allowed us to keep our finger on the pulse of the industry. And I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the results from our most recent survey. So earlier this year, we surveyed 25 of the top pharmaceutical companies, executives, to get a sense of, their level of investment, how strategically important RWE is, where are they placing their bets, and what are some of the, the headwinds and tailwinds that they're facing. So, in this year's survey, we continue to see that RWE is critical to organization strategy. 96% of organizations believe it is either very important or critical to their overall go-forward strategy. 40% are actually even discussing it within the C-suite within their organization. So this really underscores the level of strategic importance of RWE. And if you go back 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, and ask anyone within a pharma company, what RWE was, good chances they probably didn't even know. Today, it is kind of ubiquitous within a pharmaceutical company. This has been a consistent trend we've seen, across all of our surveys. The amount of spend that has been we've observed in our surveys is approaching over $1 billion of spent over the last 5 years in just building out enabling capabilities. And in that time, we've seen internal teams So many pharmaceutical companies have started to build up, significant capability and capacity internally to start to generate these insights and evidence internally. Historically, going back 10, 15 years ago, this was something that was, for the most part, outsourced. Where we are today is we have, substantial teams within almost every major pharma company that focus on generating insights and evidence from real world data. And over this time, we've seen, the use cases for RWE evolve. So over the last decade or so, if you go back to our earlier surveys, the 2017-18 timeframe, predominantly those, the major use cases or the primary use cases were to support market access and comparative effectiveness. So looking at things like understanding disease burden, things that were done to prepare as a drug was about to launch. So the big investment from a pharma company in RWE came, right before launch to prepare to get access and drive adoption of the medicines. Fast forward to the early 2020s, we started to see a big shift into R&D. So we now had organizations both supporting market access and R&D, and I think a lot of the R&D focus was driven, in part because of necessity. So COVID-19 happened, and companies had to fundamentally change how they're executing trials if they were going to try to continue to do clinical development. So things like, external control arms or synthetic control arms, using these data to better inform site selection, modeling out studies, and just using this data in new ways to inform key decisions with R&D. Now, where we are today, and I'll touch on this in a little more detail in the next slide, is we're starting to see RWE used very consistently across the drug development life cycle. So all the way from research all the way through loss of exclusivity, we're seeing, a pretty diffuse focus on the use cases. So in our latest survey, we asked organizations where's your biggest focus, and it's really across these categories. So it's pretty evenly split. So post-market surveillance, roughly 50% of organizations are focusing on that. Market access and HTAs, 44% cite using RWE as an essential for payer negotiations and HTA assessments. And then 40% are also using it in clinical development and payer strategies. So what does this really mean? This is, a diversification of RWE. And it suggests that there's growing maturity of this capabilities. It's now kind of embedded across the value chain of many of these companies. And where they are now in their journey is starting to prepare for the next wave of innovation. So there has been a lot of money spent in building out these capabilities over the last, 7+ years. So some could argue, well, this is now a mature capability. But what we're seeing is, with the advent of generative AI, it's unlocking kind of, significant additional potential to leverage these data. So in this year's survey, we actually did talk about, and we want to understand how's generative AI being used today? What are the perceptions of it? Is this just another fad, like some of the other technology trends we've seen, or is this something that's really going to drive meaningful change in how real-world evidence is applied? And from the survey, it's pretty significant, right? So over the next 12 months, there's widespread optimism. So 80% of industry leaders we talk to feel generative AI is going to transform various workflows around RWE in the coming year. 75% it's going to accelerate the actual analysis of data. So having agents and co-pilots to actually help with some of that upfront feasibility and analysis of the data, to things like creating, protocols and statistical analysis plans and summarizing results. Right, those are the areas where companies, believe Gen AI is going to have a significant impact, and we're already starting to see organizations, make headway in this space. 56% are already citing cost reductions from their investments, and 44% are seeing productivity gains for the ones that have adopted it. So, unlike other technologies we've seen in the past, and Brett kind of touched on this, there's not really a wait and see approach that's happening here. Companies have, definitely over the last 24 months have really jumped into the Gen AI space as it relates to RWE because of, a lot of what I cited earlier, right? There's just enough proof points there to show that this is something that's going to make a meaningful impact. And what we're seeing today right now is all the value is being captured in cost reductions, productivity gains, but there is a view that this is going to be table stakes relatively quickly, right? Just like with any generative AI solutions, right? Like you're going to expect that. That's table stakes. Where companies are starting to go now is those more transformative use cases, whether it's around using generative AI to essentially develop better evidence strategies for their assets, or even using it to design better studies, right? So really transforming how what evidence they generate and how they generate that evidence, and then even how they disseminate that evidence externally. So in order to do this, there's modern capabilities that need to be put into place. So in our survey, we've asked, over the next 2 to 3 years, what level of investment do you foresee, right? So 96% of respondents expect a moderate to significant increase in their investments, and it's across these 4 main categories. The first one's really around RWE study management. And if you think about how just the sheer volume of studies is changing over time, so, it's not uncommon for a major pharmaceutical company to have 400 to 500 RWE studies generated in a given year. So now you're at a volume and a scale that is very hard to manage in spreadsheets and PowerPoints. So companies are starting to build systems to manage these more like you manage a clinical trial, like with a CTMS system. So having systems to track the entire process from study concept, showing, these concepts are filling these prioritized evidence gaps, and then what are the evidence tactics that are being deployed to fill those gaps, and then what are the publications and the impact of those publications. So end-to-end systems to manage the breadth and depth of all the studies that are being generated. Second big category where we're seeing investment is around advanced analytics, and really the big key driving this is around Gen AI. Data linkage is another area where we're going to continue to see investment, right? So tokenization technologies aren't new. There's several vendors out there that offer them, but what's key is in order to have accurate models, you need to feed them more and more data. So being able to link these disparate data sources together to feed the various use cases is going to become even more important today than it has been in the past. Right? And then the final place where we continue to see investment is around what we call knowledge management of these RWE studies. So again, if a company is generating 400 to 500 studies in a given year, and you don't have systems to manage this, you run the risk of duplication of efforts, inconsistent results, conflicting results, which can be very problematic for organizations. So we're going to continue to see investment. A lot of this is geared towards powering Gen AI as we continue to make significant headway in that space. So one of the biggest questions I've gotten over the last 10 years is really around, how do we measure the ROI of these investments, whether it was the investments we've been making over the last 10 years or now moving forward with Gen AI. We're going to be spending a lot more money building out these capabilities. How do we best quantify the ROI? So we asked survey participants, how are you doing today? And kind of the takeaway here is there's really lack of consensus across the industry. There's no clear or concise way to measure it. What we're seeing right now in practice, if you look at the second column there around common metrics, is organizations are taking a very quantitative approach. So tracking number of studies completed, number of publications, how many regulatory submissions has the RWE supported. There are some that are tracking reduction in time spent or stakeholder satisfaction. One can argue that the current state of tracking ROI is that organizations are measuring what's measurable and not necessarily what should be measured, right? So the top metrics that we've seen across the industry really are around how often it's being used to inform internal decision making, and then just the sheer volume of studies being generated. And that's a a good signal, but it falls short of creating kind of a holistic view of the value RWE is generating. And you run the risk of misalignment with strategic priorities. So if you're incentivizing teams to do more, there's going to be less focus on the highest value impact activities and moving the needle on true business outcomes, and it's just going to be focused on sheer volume. So this is, this is something that the industry continues to ask themselves, and there's room for improvement, right, in better quantifying the true impact of these investments. So what we're starting to see is a shift towards a more outcomes-oriented value tracking. So organizations are starting to develop those systems I talked about. So creating systems to track the breadth of evidence and insights that have been generated from this capability, how it's actually, what the intended use was, how it's being used, the cost, and the observed benefits. So we're creating systems around quantifying the value and the impact of this. Organizations also need to develop what we call an RWE value framework. So this helps you align all stages of drug development and commercialization and the value that RWE can deliver in those various parts of the product lifecycle. And this helps leaders make more informed decisions on where they should place the bet. So there's going to be more investment in this space, but every investment is going to have a limit. So where do you start to place your bets on the future of RWE? And the last piece that we're starting to see organizations do is really align on KPIs and metrics that better articulate the value that's being delivered, right? And this creates a common language that could be used across the entire business to track performance and outcomes. So what's the path forward within the life science industry in this era of generative AI? So I think we're at a rare opportunity where you can modernize your RWE capabilities and enhance both internal decision making and then also external decision making, whether that's from payers, providers, or patients. And this really starts with that next level or that next wave of innovation is going to be focused on generative AI. So your organizations really need to clearly define their goals and align their investments to those goals. And many major pharmaceutical companies have already invested in some kind of general purpose Gen AI platforms. So our view is you need to leverage these internal capabilities to maximize the scalability of these investments. It does a couple of things, right? Companies have spent a lot of money on these platforms already. They could be tuned and augmented to support the niche use cases in RWE. It helps protect your data, keeps your data within your organization. It also gives you the flexibility to adapt them to your nuanced needs of your organization. Moving to the right-hand part of the slide, I've already kind of touched on this. It's critical to put in place a systematic way to measure the ROI of these investments because it's just a good practice. Leaders are going to be expecting it because I think on one of Brett's slides, we're at the beginning of the Gen AI journey, right? So it's it is almost going straight up the curve. So in order to sustain investment in this space, you're going to have to show ROI. You also need to embed trust, transparency, and traceability in how the AI is being used. So this space is interesting and unique in some respects because we're probably not going to get to a world where it's push button evidence, right? And I don't think anyone wants that. You want to have a human in a loop design of all these new workflows. As we start to build trust in these models, you're always going to need those human experts to be there kind of supervising the agents and making sure that the quality of the work is there, right? We are generating evidence here that is supporting big decisions internally that have millions, if not billions of dollars behind them. And then externally for patient care, you want to make sure that the evidence is of high quality and reproducible. And the way to do that right now is going to have humans in the loop as we kind of start to enter this new world of how RWE is going to be generated. And the last piece really is around, the necessary training and tools and skills, right? The RWE scientist in 3 to 4 years is going to look very different than the RWE scientist today. So teaching them the necessary skills, whether that's prompt engineering or what have you, is going to be key to scaling these capabilities and really driving the adoption of them. So we got a couple minutes left. I'm just going to give you kind of a glimpse of the future of, what we see agentic AI and RWE generation is going to look like. So I could skip over this, but I think we all know, agentic AI, can essentially autonomously analyze situations, make decisions, take actions, and adapt to achieve goals with minimal human intervention, right? So this can be, and this is being applied to the entire RWE life cycle. So if you think about agentic AI, it really offers a step change in how RWE is planned for and generated. And you can embed agents across these kind of 4 pillars or categories of RWE. So it starts with evidence planning. So what story do we want to tell the market about our asset? And then what evidence gaps do we need to fill to support that story? Then to the study design and execution and dissemination. So there's opportunity across all these kind of pillars to take what today is a very manual process, for good reason. It's manual, right? Like I said, it's, we have to ensure high quality and reproducibility, but there's opportunity for improvement. And if you think about how the demand for RWE has grown over the years, and it's going to continue to grow, if it hasn't outpaced capacity already, it will shortly. So without generative AI and agentic AI, companies run the risk of falling behind their peers. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of quickly double click on each of these categories and just show you kind of where we, how things happen today and what it could look like in an agentic future. So if you think about evidence planning, how it's done today, it's the top kind of swim lane there. Group comes together, defines their strategic objectives for the asset. So it's very manual and time consuming. Then they identify, what evidence gaps exist today to support that story. And then they prioritize which gaps they're going to fill. And that goes into an integrated evidence plan, right? And today, how's this done within a pharma company? It's cross-functional teams come together of experts and, workshop what the strategic priorities for the asset, what the evidence gaps are, and then they go through some sort of prioritization exercise. Every company has, different rubrics for prioritizing things. Some are more rigorous than others. And then even within given organizations, asset team A may do it slightly different than asset team team B. So in an agentic future, we're going to have agents that could assist across this entire process. You got agents that are helping inform your strategic objectives of your assets. So scanning conference publications, conference abstracts, citations out there in the public domain, looking at your internal strategy documents, your historic evidence, kind of taking that large corpus of information and using that to inform your strategic objectives of your asset. And then same could be done for looking at, where are there evidence needs or where are the evidence gaps today? So looking at the strategy you want to deploy, and then looking at the body of evidence that you're generating within your organization, and then even externally, and then starting to flag where the evidence gaps are so that your teams could prioritize them. And then agents even helping suggest novel tactics to address those prioritized evidence gaps. Those all then get fed into your evidence plans. Right. And then once you get to study design, right, today it's you have your tactics, you have your set plan, your book of work that you need to execute on. So now you have to define your protocol, find the data sets that you're going to use, conduct the various feasibilities, based on that, you might refine your protocol again. Again, very manual and time consuming. In the future, and this future honestly is today, companies have protocol design agents that are now assisting them looking at historic protocols and looking at your study concepts and creating first drafts of those protocols. And then even doing data feasibility. So taking those protocols and those cohort definitions and being able to query real world data sets, automatically, and creating attrition funnels to show you what the available population is, and looking at, is there the appropriate variables in any given data set to execute on my study. And then if there's, things that have been flagged, revising that protocol. So this could all be done, via agents and assistants at this point, or co-pilots, I should say. So really streamlining the study design process from, what could take months and months in some instances to a few weeks. And then once the study design is defined, we move into study execution. So you're building and analyzing your cohort. You're having your data scientist teams or your data analysts creating SQL or SAS or R code to pull the data. They're modeling and matching it, right? Then they're creating the summary results and interpreting those results. Again, very time consuming, labor intensive, and slow. In an agentic future, we're working with clients today where we have solutions that you could create your cohort definition in natural language, and the agent creates the queries on the back end to pull that data. They could assist with modeling and matching if that's needed, and then even providing a draft of those initial results and findings for review. So like we're taking study execution again from months and months to days to weeks. And then finally, around evidence dissemination. Again, starts with aligning on, well, what message do we want to bring to the market based on this study, and then what channel are we going to push that out from? And then you have to develop those materials, and typically the development of those materials, it's someone drafts it manually, and then there's iterations of those drafts, and then it goes through medical legal review, and then there's revisions, and it gets sent back. All this could be automated with agents and assisted with agents to really streamline this. And we're working with clients across all these dimensions today, creating kind of co-pilots as they're authoring those materials, flagging things that historically have been flagged by legal and medical as something that can't be in the document. So catching a lot of those issues ahead of submission. So just taking that medical legal review process from 10 reviews down to 2, right? Saving significant time. And then the last mile is really around tracking impact and learning from the evidence. So today, as I mentioned before, ROI is, it's kind of, dispersed how people are, or how organizations are looking at this. In the future, we're going to see agents actually starting to, autonomously look how often it's been cited out in the public domain, looking within pharma, medical teams, CRM systems to see how often it's been referenced in call notes. So starting to actually put some data behind how often the evidence is being used, and then how much kind of impact and pull through we're seeing out there in the market. So this is just kind of a glimpse of, I keep saying it's a glimpse of the future, but some of this future is actually already happening today. There's great momentum behind this space. And, I'm personally excited about the work I'm doing with clients in this space and the stories I'm hearing across the industry, and just kind of look forward to, what the future holds over the next, let's say 12 months. Cause I think it's, if you invite me back in 12 months from now, I think we're going to have some really interesting, case studies to be talking about how, a lot of what I just talked about really, has been scaled within many of the leading pharmaceutical companies. So with that, Parav, maybe I'll turn it back over to you to see if you have any comments or questions.
Thank you, Jeff. There are a few questions from the audience. So flash them on the screen if you or Brett can take at least a couple of them.
Yeah. So what will be the role of a researcher in the future as Gen AI becomes more impactful, and how do you prepare for that future? So it's a great question. So, my perspective is, and I think I mentioned this in my talk, that human in the loop is going to be necessary still. So we're not going to fully automate RWE. It's not going to be push button, but what we're going to start to see is now researchers are going to have agents working underneath them, and they're going to be supervising these agents as well. So it's going to, the scientific know-how is still going to be needed, but what they need to do to prepare for the future is get really smart and understand how these models work, and then how to actually prompt these models to get the outputs that you need. Brett, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the future of research is, as I indicated in my opening, is incredibly bright. If I was a young investigator starting my career with this in front of me, like, you think about how hard it is to bring together multidisciplinary teams of material scientists and biologists and chemists and clinicians and in this agentic world we're entering. We now can orchestrate multidisciplinary teams of expertise that before only existed at some of the world's leading research labs, where you could afford to get that assembly of talent together. So I actually think we're at the dawn of what's going to be an incredibly vibrant period for researchers who can think multidisciplinary, orchestrate and really understand underlying clinical problems, and bring the human and the agentic multidisciplinary expertise together to fuel what should be a massive increase in the flywheel of innovation in life sciences and healthcare, and our fundamental understanding of human health and disease. It's going to be pretty exciting. I wouldn't be worried about being out of a job unless you're doing very rote manual things in the research process.
Okay, so I think we got one more, maybe time for one more question, perhaps. So, as we continue to see the rise of RWE in healthcare, what are the top 3 things healthcare organizations should focus on in order to successfully integrate real-world evidence into their operations? A good question, Brett. Maybe I'll toss this one to you. See what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. Are we talking about healthcare delivery or on the life sciences side? I think Jeff already covered some of the things that we would recommend the life sciences side of life sciences and healthcare would cover. If this is in the context of healthcare, delivery, we're already starting to see, depending on the market, some incorporation of real-world evidence and Gen AI into clinical workflows to document clinical visits, which then create better context for better human-based clinical decision-making at future follow-ups. So I think what we're encouraging most healthcare organizations to do is really think about that virtuous loop within the confines of the clinical life cycle of a patient journey. And that's creating human context across visits for complex diseases that didn't exist yet. I do think we're going to need to see some progression in the regulatory science around this before, in the legal frameworks in various jurisdictions globally, before we see widespread adoption of a Gen AI doctor actually making clinical recommendations that should just be accepted on face value. I think there, not because of the advancements in AI, but because of the adoption at the pace of regulatory science and at the adoption of legal frameworks, we'll see a rate limiter on some of that adoption in clinical practice. That will slow things down. Just like we're seeing, frankly, at the organizational level, AI adoption inside large organizations is happening at the pace of an organization's ability to adopt. The technology far outstrips already an organization's ability to adopt. I think medicine will be similar.
With that, I know we are running out of time, so we really like to take this moment to thank both Brett and Jeff for taking the time and sharing their insights. Like I said, this session was very personal to me and a blast from the past, like how Brett started the session, the aspiration from 25 years ago to where Jeff covered what we are today. It's been an incredible progress in the world of real-world evidence and research. And now it's happening at an exponential pace. So like you said, Jeff, next year probably when you come back and share what has happened in the industry, probably you'd see a lot more transformation and the pace of it. So with that, we thank both of our speakers and would like to conclude this session as well as the day for our conference today. Looking forward to engaging with everyone tomorrow and continuing this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Bharat. Thanks, everybody.
That's all.